Hello, I'm Chris Geremia. I'm the park's bison biologist. And I guess I want to start by, it's a beautiful spring day here in the park. And I think we can just all you know how it is every year. It's winter. Here it's winter for several months. And it starts getting nice and you just want to be outside because everything's coming back to life. And I think we can appreciate that so much more than normal, this particular year. It's an amazing time to come to Yellowstone. Most of the animals in the winter, they leave the park or they come down to the boundary. And springtime, that's time to come home. And bison, pronghorn, grizzly bears are waking up, songbirds are returning. The snows and the spring rains have put in a ton of moisture into the soils. The soils are about to wake up. The plants start waking up. It's the lifeblood of this ecosystem. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is we spent about 10 years studying how bison migrated across the park. It's a pretty cool story, but what blew me away the most is that when we finally figured out about how and when and why bison were moving, we just stumbled on the fact that they change the entire way that spring comes to this park. They change how this land turns from white to brown to green. And as I talk about some of the details and some of the science details, I just think about what did that mean when there were 30 to 60 million bison that roamed across this continent. If they can change the way that spring happens just to this park, if you gave bison room to roam, you could just imagine what would happen. So what I'm going to talk about is springtime movements. It's generally well known that animals move to the right places at the right time. What's the right time? For an animal, as a plant starts growing and it starts getting taller, it starts accumulating nitrogen, which is basically protein, to an animal, to an herbivore. And it starts accumulating carbon, which is basically fiber, indigestible material to an herbivore. So, migrating mule deer and pronghorn and bison, they're moving across this land trying to figure out, how do I balance? How do I get a lot of protein, but not a whole lot of fiber? So I'm getting the biggest bang for every bite because I need to put on all of my weight right now so that I can nurse my baby, so that I can move and respond to predators, and so that I can be ready to have another baby next next year. We know that from clipping plants in this park, and people have done this in other places, that when the grass first emerges in spring, when it's super short, shorter than what you can see around me, and this is pretty short grass around me, when it's super short, that has a ton of nitrogen and not a lot of fiber, but it's hard to get a big bite. On the other side, when the grasses start waving in the wind, like a postcard, those grasses have a ton of material and fiber. It's not very digestible to an animal. So these animals are moving in tempo with this moderate growth of plants. When things are about the height of a cut lawn, if you ran your lawnmower across it. And that wave of spring, that green wave, is moving from this low elevation, we're down here at about 5,000 feet, all the way up to the highest elevations that bison move to, which is more than 9,000 feet in the park. And that progression of the green wave takes over 2 months in the park. So animals have 2 months to eat all of the best foods they can eat for the year. And we found out that deer, pronghorn, mule deer in particular, precisely choreograph their migrations with that green wave because they need to get all of the food. Now bison, that's not what we figured out. So the way we started was we're going out in the fall, we dart animals, put radio collars on them, and then those radio collars would have a GPS transmitter on it. A GPS transmitter would take a location, transmit that location up to a satellite. That satellite would transmit that location to us in the offices so we could see where an animal was every 2 hours of the year. And then we went and looked at satellite imagery, taking snapshots of the ground every week of the year, NASA satellites. And we would look at those images and see, okay, did it start greening up yet? Is it greening up really quickly? Is it hitting that moderate level, that I talked about, that animals are seeking out, the height of a lawn-mowered lawn? Or is it, past that point and the grass is really tall? And we would ask the question, okay, the satellite says, this is the green wave right now at this location. And then we would ask, from the bison data, did they arrive at that location at that precise moment in time? Or did they get there in front of it? Or did they get there behind it? And when they're getting there at that precise time, we kind of call that surfing the green wave, because their movements are in tune with with when the land is the most nutritious. In springtime, like right now, bison are surfing like crazy. They are stepping with the progression of green up the mountainsides from the valleys to the tops. But come about late May, it just stops. Looking at all of that GPS data, they just fall behind, and they fall increasingly far behind. And then crazily, at the end of summer, they try to catch back up to it, but they never really do. So the next question was, well, what does that mean to an animal? So my team and I would track radio collar animals, and we'd locate a group just like this as they're moving across the land. We would wait for 5 of these animals to poop. I don't know how else to say that. And then we would walk up to those piles, collect a couple of grams, so about a tablespoon from each poop pile, and then we would send it off to the lab. When we sent it off to the lab, they would shine light on that poop and see literally how nutritious is it. And what we found was that bison, while they were surfing the green wave, had incredibly high diet. But when they fell behind the wave, when they let it pass them by, when they stayed, and then the green wave went up to 9,000 feet and they were staying at like 7,000 feet, their diet said they were still surfing the green wave. They were still getting the same quality foods. So the next step was, how? Why? So we started setting up these grazing exclosures that you can see here. And I think we set up more than 350 exclosures across the park. And again, a lot of that is also used to try and understand, how stable is the grazing ecosystem of Yellowstone. But we would look inside one of these exclosures, and we'd look outside, and we'd clip plant matter from outside the exclosure and then inside the exclosure, and we compare how nutritious they are. What we found was, in places like this, down here at the start of the migration, there was no difference inside and outside the cages. And as you got about a third of the way along the migration, maybe 20 miles from here, no difference. Same thing inside and outside the cage. But when you started to get to, this thing I'm going to talk about next, these grazing lawns that the bison use, as you get towards the Lamar Valley and about 30 to 40 miles from where we're standing right now, there was a massive difference outside and inside the exclosures. Outside the exclosures, the grass was the same highly nutritious food that you find when animals are surfing the green wave. But inside the exclosure, that wasn't the case at all. That that the grasses were growing, they're getting taller, and they're accumulating all that fiber, and they really weren't that nutritious to bison. So we were finding like these areas where bison are, grazing, falling behind the wave. There's another part of the story. At the time they do that, June, July, early August, it's rare to see groups like what you see behind me. 20 animals. You may see 2,000 animals. You may see 3,000 animals. The bison, come together as they migrate and form this massive unit. And it's like putting fleets of lawnmowers across this park, and they're constantly returning to graze the same areas. And we find out that individuals return to the same areas about once every 14 days. And they're just, in this cycle, kind of like you would be if you, I grew up in suburbia, Once every week or two, I had to go cut the lawn. And it kept the lawn in that perfect height for a grazing herbivore. So the bison were actually, resetting springtime by grazing in these big numbers, 2/3 of the way up their migration route. And it provided them the same exact kind of food they would get as if they were surfing the green wave. And it, I don't know what to say. And then kind of the last part of the work that we did that really was what struck me was that we looked at satellite images over the last decade or two. And over this time, there's 2 areas in the park where it's really good to come here in the summer and see bison. One of them is the Northern Range in the Lamar Valley. The other one is around Canyon, Hayden Valley. That area we call the Central Herd. The area in the Northern Park we call the Northern Herd. And since 2000, the Northern Herd, increased from a few hundred animals all the way up to 4,000 animals. And the Central Herd, at the same time, increased to about 3,500 animals and then declined to right about 1,000 animals. So we have these 2 different stories going on in these 2 areas of the park. So we looked at the same locations and we looked at how that landscape greened up from satellite imagery, and we looked at how that happened each year. And we looked at it as in one area of the park there were more and more bison grazing more intensely, and in the other area of the park there were fewer and fewer bison. And what we found out was that as you got these big groups of bison grazing together, they caused the spring, green up to happen earlier. They caused it to happen quicker. They caused the whole area to become more productive. So it produced more plant matter than it would have if the bison weren't there. It stayed more nutritious longer. So they were shaping the entire way this green wave was moving across the park. And you talk about bison as an ecosystem engineer. They're not at the whim of nature, like mule deer or pronghorn, having to move and stay, dance with this green wave across the park and figure out how to evade predators at the same time. Bison are like this giant animal jumping into the pool, making their own wave of nutritious food in addition to surfing earlier in the year. And this place would look fundamentally different if it wasn't for having, what we've taken over 100 years to conserve. We brought back wolves in the mid-1990s. Massive conservation success story. With that, we've restored the predator populations of mountain lions and grizzly bears and black bears. We started bison conservation 21 or something years ago in 1901 here. And it only took until just recently to really have bison conservation catch up, to let the herds grow and relearn the park. So finally now we have an ecosystem when you come here today where we've restored the top dog, and we've restored the animal that evolved to combat the top dog, the bison. And the Yellowstone you see here is kind of this ebb and flow between top predators and bison, shaping how plants grow, shaping the plant communities, shaping how the soils recycle nutrients to make them available to plants. It's really something else to see. And all of this success of bringing back bison, restoring these ecosystems, it only works because we've worked very hard to manage conflicts when bison leave the park. As I said, they're a migratory animal. They move to the right places at the right time. That means when animals are moving out of the park, it's not because the park's overgrazed. It's because it's better for them to be in the low elevation areas where food's more available. Then it puts them in a spot where they can then surf the wave back up into the park. So they're moving out of the park naturally because it's the best thing for them to do. It created conflict, and we've worked really hard with Native American tribes, with the state of Montana, with the Forest Service, various non-governmental organizations to try and manage that conflict. This last winter, probably about 1,000 animals moved all the way down to where we're standing right here. Native Americans harvested roughly 200 of those animals. And other than that, the animals were allowed to roam in these critical winter ranges and then be ready to do this, migrate back to their home. This is the end of the migration right here. The thousands of animals are in front of them. One of the other programs that we're working on to reduce conflict is the Bison Conservation Transfer Program. It's the right thing to do, and it's taken us a lot of time and a lot of partnerships and a lot of trust building. What it does is, in order to help control numbers migrating out of the park, we do capture animals most winters. Up until recently, animals that were captured were generally sent to slaughter, their meat given to Native American tribes. This program, identifies animals that don't have a disease called brucellosis, and at the conclusion of that program, which can take a year or two or more, they're transferred to Native American tribes. First, the Fort Peck tribes, and from there they're transferred through the Intertribal Buffalo Council to more than 60 of their member tribes across the country. It's been an incredible success, and I think with that, I hope you come here to see Yellowstone and see a place where it's working, the ecosystem is working. And it's more than just seeing a bison or seeing a wolf. It's seeing them interact, and it's seeing them move across this ecosystem. This herd is your reconnection in North America to the long lost herds that are gone. They have incredible cultural value, they have incredible ecological value, that's what I was just talking about, spiritual value. And we're letting those things happen by finding the best ways possible to manage the conflicts and finding better ways to do it. So with that, I'd be happy to answer a few questions.
Thank you so much for that, Chris. Well, so we've got a few questions that people have been asking, and you touched on a few of them, but what's the population at right now of bison in the park?
Absolutely. So we came into winter with about 5,000 animals. Natural mortality and other things probably reduced that to somewhere in the low 4,000s. Maybe as much as 4,500 animals. My expectation is that after calving, and calving's just happening, the first calf hit the ground in the first week of April. Peak calving happens in the first 2 weeks of May. With most of the calves born, I bet there will be 800 to 900 calves born. So likely we will be somewhere between 5,000 and 5,500 animals in the population here in the next month or two.
Okay, and then I just saw a question in here about the green wave. So you're talking about the difference between ungulates and how they graze, and how bison are less at the whim of what nature's doing. They can actually change based on how, is there a number, like a certain population that they have to reach in order to be able to do that? Or can a small group, have like an impact on the landscape? Like if they were to go out in Lamar Valley, do you guys know of a number that's like a threshold?
I don't know a number that's a threshold. I think what you're talking about is this classic ecological question called scale. So everything that I was talking about is happening across multiple ecological scales. So with a small, even this little group is affecting how the forage is growing in this tiny little spot. But the whole population as an aggregate is making that happen across a much larger landscape. So giving small groups of bison room to roam is absolutely going to affect the ecosystem. Giving large groups of bison room to roam is going to magnify that times some unmeasurable number.
So I guess on that same point, is a better or a different question would be, are bison the only species that can really have this effect on the landscape because of how they, herd together and how they, elk tend to, I guess if you could get a bunch of deer and a bunch of elk in the same place, is it possible that they could have the same effect as bison, or is it just this species is the one that's able to do that because of how they form together and how they graze and migrate?
My guess is that at the landscape scale, it takes an aggregate grazer. So there's types of grazers that group up and form massive groups. Bison are the quintessential example in North America. Moose are the exact opposite. In the Serengeti, wildebeest were that animal. But there's over 25 different grazing herbivores in the Serengeti. So there are aggregate grazers, including some waterfowl, that form these massive groups and graze together. And those will be the types of species that have these effects at big scale.
Gotcha. So some of the other questions that are coming in are about the conservation of bison, the whole big picture. Starting over 100 years ago, what did the park do initially to start conservation, and why did they start it? I mean, what was the issue and the impetus for them?
The park, and really the precursor to the park, the military, did the right thing. There were about 24 animals that were about 70 to 80 miles from here, just deep within the park. At that time, there were only about 200 to 400 other bison left across North America, down from 30 to 60 million just 200 years prior to that. And at that time we decided we were going to bring in 21 more animals from the walking coyote herd and from the goodnight herd. And we started ranching them in the Lamar Valley. We cultivated the area, we grew grasses, we grew hay, we built corrals, and that saved bison. Bison from this park have gone on to start almost every other, through, a couple degrees of separation, almost every other conservation herd in North America today. Anyway, we spent maybe 50 years, building the population up, then trucking them to other areas of the park, controlling numbers to some extent, and then letting it go in the late 1960s. And at that point, the bison population was probably fewer than 1,000 animals, and it started to grow. And then we've just been really successful over the last 20 years of finding a way to let it continue to grow and continue to restore and improve this ecosystem.
So if the bison were, just to vanish right now, what sort of impacts do you think, would positive or negative, if they were to just be completely gone? Some of the people were asking, does it have an effect on fire ecosystem, and what does it do just with how the park would look to your average everyday person?
Gosh, there's a million ways to answer that. The first thing I'd say is that would be a very sad day, because these animals provide an incredible cultural, spiritual connection for people to the long lost herds used to roam this continent. Ecologically speaking, you mentioned fire. So as you move, right now we're on the west side of where bison used to roam across North America. It's where the prairies hit the mountains. As you move into the prairie and head east, the plant communities change. And as you get to the easternmost part, the tall grass prairie, you have highly productive plant communities. And if you take away fire and grazing there, you get woody encroachment. So in those areas, those highly productive areas, removing bison and fire, basically makes the prairie turn into a savanna. As you move back to this side, it's fire is an important part of this ecosystem. So is grazing, and what we're finding is that grazing will reduce the chances of fire in many locations by reducing standing crop and reducing the ability of a fire to carry. Then bison in turn are switching the plant communities that are here, building what are called obligate species that thrive under high grazing and will do better here because of the grazing. In turn, that changes the microbial populations that live there. It changes the, some of the research that I'll hopefully talk about in the next year or two is we're using these sites to then look at how does that affect arthropod diversity, so insect diversity, how does it affect small mammal diversity. You can't take the thing that forms this ecosystem, one of the most dominant drivers of this system, and take it away and expect that it wouldn't fundamentally change how nutrients move through the system, how water gets used in the system, what species of animals and plants live here. So it's really cool to be able to see this evolve in front of us. And we're just beginning to detect the ways that what we're doing here is the right thing.
So, about the research you mentioned, do you want to touch on the recent publication that you guys had and where, if there's any, it sounds like in the comments we have some students that are watching right now. And
Oh
so for
my.
people that are interested in learning more about the science of what you guys did.
Absolutely. So the paper's available at the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It's freely downloadable to anybody. So just go to pnas.org. And, I recently did a talk for the Cody Museum, the Buffalo Bill Historical Society. That is available on YouTube. And that was me sitting in front of a screen doing a virtual hour-long seminar on the science behind this. They're going through all of the figures and the analyses. So if you're into that, I highly recommend going there before you, look up the paper at PNAS. And you can also go for, some recent updates on the conservation status of bison in this park to the Yellowstone Park web pages. Look up mammals, look up bison, and we put together a conservation report, I think this last November or December, which is downloadable and viewable, and it talks about ecosystem engineering, some of the work we're doing.
Cool, yeah, we'll be able to drop that in the links below so people
Awesome.
can check that out. So now that things are kind of wrapping up, would you like to end on a personal story or why bison means so much to you? Like, step out of your ranger hat and just, the job that you get to do, but just what do bison, do you have any interesting stories or something you'd like to share about why what you get to do is important to you and why you love doing it?
Gosh, I'm trying to, the thing that's on the, I don't know how to answer that. The thing that's on the tip of my tongue today, it was what I was doing right before I was down here. It's like I probably still have hay, a bunch of hay in my pockets and knives because I was feeding some of the animals that we're holding, running through that conservation transfer program that we're trying to get to the Fort Peck tribes here by later this year, by December this year. And, I was just down in the pastures with them, and every time I'm down there, I just feel this sense of success, this sense of opportunity. When I came here, which was in 2001, every animal that got rounded up trying to migrate out of the park was basically sent to slaughter. And finding an alternative to that, it's really important. And I think of the first transfer that the park did. We moved 55 bulls to the Fort Peck tribes. It was August of 2019. The first day of the transfer, we were loading 3 animals at a time onto horse trailers and then sending them the 500 miles. Each animal was in its own compartment. We started that early in the morning, 3 or 4 in the morning. And then as the trailer was loaded, it was on its way to Fort Peck. We had 7 trailers traveling that first day. I was at the end of the line. And I can't tell you, and I had to be at the end of the line because we had vet trucks. We had to, ensure that the state was aware of the transfer and everything was going right, respond to any emergencies. We had, a maintenance vehicle traveling in line, a spare trailer in case anything happened, to do everything possible to get those animals there safely. So I was in the back, the last one in line. And I can't tell you how badly I wanted to be there when those trailer doors opened and those animals got released onto the pastures of Fort Peck. Those animals live on more than 20,000 acres right now. And I didn't. And it just makes me realize, the people who did get to see it were many members of the Fort Peck tribes. And if I couldn't wait to see it, I can only begin to think of what it meant to them. So I think with that was the latest story that I could come up with.
Yeah.
And thanks for listening.